Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Fall 2020, the EdCollab Gathering. I'm Chris Lehman, the founding director of the Educator Collaborative, and we are so happy to have you here today with us. If you're tuning in live, sorry for some of the technical issues that we had at the start. It's not abnormal for, for this day to have a little something glitchy, and that's what we had this morning, but we're glad that you're back here with us. Many of you were following along on our Twitter handle at the EdCollab. That's the best place to follow along all day long in case there's any issues with any streams or something's not doing what it's supposed to. We'll constantly update information from there. So we're so happy to have you with us. I'm going to give us just a few announcements this morning, a few opening remarks, and then we'll move ahead to our keynote. So first of all, if you've never joined the EdCollab Gathering before, welcome. It's a totally free, no registration day of learning that happens right now live while you're here watching with us, but then also will be archived on our website until the next gathering that happens in April. So if there's two workshops you want to see at the same time, you can watch the other one later. They'll be right there for you. A few ways that you can navigate the gathering. One is to follow us on Twitter at the EdCollab, and there you'll find links to videos as well as updates. Or you might be joining us right from our page. Just use the workshop link. A little drop-down menu will come, and from there you can access all of the sessions, or you can do the same thing from the agenda page. That's probably even the easiest place to go. From there, you can click on any title, and you'll go right to the session page itself. Also, we encourage you, because we're not in person together, instead we're just all here in the virtual universe. If you go onto any page and you're watching a session and you really enjoy what you see, please use the hashtag put the at the start of it, the EdCollab Gathering. And in the bio for every presenter, you'll see their Twitter handles. So for example, if you're watching Vinay's session later, you can click right there, @TokenBlackTeacher is their Twitter handle. You can tweet her directly and say, thank you for your amazing session. It will be an amazing session. Because the gathering is totally free and there's no registration, what we do ask you to consider is to pay the joy that you feel today forward to one of our adopted charities. We, every gathering, ask our keynotes to adopt some charities for us for the day. And if you go to gathering.theeducatorcollaborative.com/charity or click on any image or link on our page, you'll go straight to a page that describes more about today's charities. Today, we're adopting RACES, the Refugee Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services. Donalyn Miller chose that for us. And then also the Abolitionist Teaching Network, which Dr. Sonia Cherry-Paul chose for us as well. You can find out more about these charities right on that page. And if you click on them on any webpage that you're on, if you click the link, it'll take you directly to that charity. You don't pay anything to us, and then we pay them, like you might at like Target checkout or something. Instead, you can go straight to them and make your own decisions there. We ask that you pay the joy forward because today there are educators who are giving of their time, energy, and expertise to support you in your own learning and reflection and growth. And chances are, like I always do, you're going to have your head brimful of ideas by the end of today. And so anything you might normally pay for registration for a day like this, or for lunch, or even for a coffee, consider paying it forward to either an adopted charity or to another charity of your choice, or you could give in some other way, like of your time or energy. I normally start the day with some remarks, and so I'm going to keep them brief here so we can get to Donalyn. But I will say that at first, I was going to start out with remarks that just acknowledged how difficult everything feels right now. It was probably going to be doom and gloom, and really thinking about the fight that we're in right now for what feels like almost everything, until I went to the Lil Nas X concert at Radio City. So just a couple days ago, I was lucky enough. I went to Radio City Music Hall here in New York City. I saw the Lil Nas X Long Live Montero tour. By the way, it was awesome. If he's coming through your city soon and you haven't seen it yet, go. Awesome. Just really good show. Really, really fun. But I went to the show, and what I left feeling was not doom and gloom. Instead, what I left feeling was Lil Nas X is a global superstar. It's not that he's a global superstar that happens to be Black and gay. He's a global superstar because he's Black and gay. Montero, Lil Nas X, is a global superstar because his Blackness and his queerness and his experiences and his identity and his life inform his incredible music and his dancing and his fashion and all the reasons why he's an incredible performer. His Blackness and his queerness makes him a superstar. He fully lives inside of that experience and gives that to all of us as the audience, and that's what makes him amazing. And not only did I feel so much joy being in Radio City Music Hall and feeling his full self performing for all of us, but I also realized that if you zoom back out from that stage, Radio City was sold out. His entire tour, I believe, has been sold out. There are thousands of people inside of each arena that want to see his true full self, Lil Nas X's Blackness and queerness. Everyone wants to be a part of his experience. And if you zoom out even more, there are millions of records that are sold. He's had #1 hits. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that there are way more of us who want the right to read, to listen, to view, to teach, to learn, to write, to love, to laugh, to celebrate, to respect, to just be. There are way more of us who want stories and lives and ourselves told on paper. There are way more of us than the people that want to destroy. There are way more of us than the people who want to ban books and change curriculums and enact laws. There are way more of us, and it doesn't feel that way. But that's on purpose. It doesn't feel that way because awful things happen in part by making all the rest of us, the literally millions of us that don't want those awful things to happen, to feel like we're alone, but we're not. I want to thank Vinay, who's presenting later today. She's leading one of our think tanks in the EdClab that I'm sitting in on across the next couple of months. And one thing we talked about in the last think tank is, there's these PTO meetings where there are these parent groups and outside groups that are yelling about banning books. Where's the other side? Couldn't we be yelling just as loudly? Or couldn't we be talking back just as much? Or couldn't we also realize that we're not alone? Because we're not. And so one thing I'd like you to think about today is this gathering is a way where we can come together and re-energize with like-minded folks who are sitting in arenas or wherever else you might be, who want the world that we want. And so use today to re-energize and then leave today remembering and knowing that we're not alone. There are more of us. And so what I encourage you to do, and all of our speakers today will encourage you to do as well, is to use your voice. When someone says something like, oh, well, we can't have books about transgender children in a 1st or 2nd grade classroom because that's bad for kids, our first reaction for some of us might be to kind of feel afraid. Well, I don't think that, but I don't want to say anything. But the reality is that's a ridiculous notion. That's not even true. That's not a fact, and that's not real. You can look right back at the person saying that, and instead of feeling like you're the only one, you can literally say, oh, well, that's not true. You can talk back, you can write back, you can work back. And if you're afraid to do so, remember there are more of us. And more than anything, we can't feel alone. So I encourage you across all of the sessions today, re-energize, feel that community spirit, and then tell yourself what are ways that you're going to be louder and firmer and more joyful and more excited as you move forward. And I'll say, on the way to the Lil Nas X concert, I passed Times Square where the Abbott Elementary billboards were up loud and proud. We're in a world full of millions of people that want stories to be told, and there are very few people who don't. We can make change. So one of those change makers that I'm so pleased to introduce, well, to reintroduce to you, she needs no introduction, is Donalyn Miller. Donalyn Miller is an award-winning educator. She's won numerous Teacher of the Year awards, as well as many, many others, including a Lifetime Achievement Award. Donalyn Miller is the author of many books for educators, which you know and love. She's co-author of The Joy of Reading, which I had somewhere. I had it on the shelf. I'm going to find it at the end. I'll hold it back up. She's co-author, and I just want to take just a moment to acknowledge she's co-author with Terry Lassane, whose energy and love and joy for reading and for books, while we don't have her here on this earth with us any longer, her work and her words live on through all of us that have ever been lucky enough to get a hug from Professor Nana. And we are so grateful her work lives on through this book that she's co-authored with Donalyn. So Donalyn can be found at thebookwhisperer.com. You can find her online at Donalyn Books. There you can contact her to invite her to speak at your school, to speak at your conference, or just to talk great books with you. Donalyn, I am so honored that you've shared your time this morning with us. Thank you for living through the technical difficulties that we had. And I'm so looking forward to having you join us.
Thank you so much, Chris, for inviting me. And of course, you know, as teachers, what's a few technical difficulties among friends? I mean, this is, right. It actually, maybe it makes it more comforting to us that that happened because we survived it and here we are.
We made it through.
I appreciate everyone who has joined us this morning and also all of you who will be watching the recording later. I appreciate you taking the time. I know that it's a fraught time for many educators right now, and you're still trying to invest in your professional learning, and I'm honored and pleased to be able to support you. You're more than welcome to take screenshots of any of my slides, but I will share with you a link where you can go back and look at all of them. We are going to talk a little bit about navigating slumps and reading motivation. I've talked to thousands of readers of all sorts of ages since the pandemic shutdown began in the spring of 2020. And talking to folks about their reading lives, it seems that some people have been reading more than ever, and some people have lost their reading mojo and everything else in between. So we'll talk about that. As Chris mentioned, I am the author of 5 books. It still makes me smile to see my name on 5 books. I'm a teacher from the suburbs of Texas. What? I have my name on 5 books, but there we are. I have my website. I'm the co-founder of the nerdybookclub.com, which is our website. It's also where Nerd Camps began. I encourage you to check out that blog for book recommendations, for interviews with authors. We also have many educators who write for the blog. And if you want to share your book love or your ideas for how to engage young people with reading, consider writing for us. I put a lot of my presentations on that SlideShare page at slideshare.net/DonalynM. And of course, I'm active on social media. The best way to find me, the quickest way to find me is on Twitter. That's my tweet ID at Donalyn Books, and be happy to connect with you there. As Chris mentioned, I did write The Joy of Reading with my dear friend and longtime collaborator, Terry Lassane. Terry was a professor in the Library Sciences Department at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas. It's one of the largest library sciences programs in our state. I think Terry probably trained at least a third of the librarians in our state. And you've never seen her. I never saw anything so beautiful as Terry walking through an exhibit hall at a librarian conference and all the young librarians that would come up and talk to her because she was their professor. Terry and I presented a lot over the years about books, about the children's rights to read. And these are the last 2 photos of us presenting for pre-service teachers at a conference in Denton, Texas. And then the last time we presented together was at Nerd Camp in Michigan in 2019. Sadly, Terry passed away from cancer in August last year, just a few weeks before the book manuscript was due. And finishing the book without her was difficult. But I'm very honored that I got to be her last collaborator, and that I might get to introduce her work to people who didn't get to learn from her. What a blessing that is. I am supporting RISIS today, and that organization is in my home state of Texas. It provides education and legal services to refugees and immigrants in my state, and I appreciate you if you have the ability to support them. Thank you for that. You know, the question, how's it going, used to be just kind of a flippant question, right? We run into each other. Hey, how's it going? Oh, it's fine. But I've noticed over the past couple of years, no one says fine when you ask that question. There's a pause. How's it going? And then people tell you how it's going. Uh, it's not such an easy question to answer anymore, but perhaps we can focus in on one corner of that question and find a place where we can comfortably reflect and answer. So, how's your reading life going these days? When was the last time you checked in with yourself as a reader? Not your kids, not your students, yourself. How's your reading life going? As I mentioned, I've talked to thousands of readers over the past couple of years, and I'll just tell you the answer to that question. Results vary. I talked to people who are reading more than ever because they brushed off their library cards during the pandemic, started using ebook and audiobook content they hadn't used before. Some folks have joined book clubs. That's something that I did. I joined an online book club. Other folks have told me that they've kind of lost their enthusiasm for reading, that state of flow that we want to fall into, where we fall into a book or we fall into a piece that we're reading and the world falls away. A lot of people tell me that it's more difficult to find that state of flow, harder to fall into what they're reading, easier to fall back out. And if no matter where you're feeling, as far as your own reading motivation might be going, if you feel that you're struggling a little bit with your reading motivation now, or your reading motivation is different than it once was, recognize that there's some science behind what you're feeling. When we're flooded with threat messages from our environment, and we certainly are right now, when we're being flooded with threat messages from our environment, from the news, from our fear about the pandemic, from the very real social and financial consequences of the pandemic on many families, when we're flooded with threat messages, we divert a lot of our physical and mental energy towards the source of that threat. And that means that we lose some of our mental flexibility and our cognitive energy for tasks like reading. If we can recognize that in ourselves, then we can certainly see that that's affecting many of the children that we care about and whose reading lives are important to us. The Lockdown Library Project was a graduate school project conducted by some students in the summer of 2020, and they surveyed almost 1,000 readers and asked them about their reading lives. How was their reading life going? How much time were they spending reading? What were they reading? And were they rereading anything? Because talking to many readers, that seems to be one strategy that readers employ to kickstart their reading lives again. They go back and read their old favorites. One of my friends is an editor, and he's also a big Star Wars or Star Trek fan. And in the summer of 2020, he went back and read all of his Star Trek paperbacks again. He said, Star Trek, it's a battle for good and evil. The good guys win. We're open. They're exploratory. And also, I just needed the comfort of those stories. I have another friend who's a middle school teacher in Illinois, but she also writes romance novels under a pseudonym. And she went back and reread a whole series of romance novels that she loved. She said she wanted her HEA. If you're romance fans, HEA means happily ever after. She wanted her happily ever afters. She said she wanted to know that there was going to be a good ending. So rereading may be one strategy that readers have employed. And what the conductors of the Lockdown Library Project found was that people were investing more time reading. They were home. They lost a lot of enrichment activities. People weren't going to the movies or to concerts or to restaurants, and they were staying home. So people were reading more because they were bored. They were isolated. Also, if you're like me, I buy books and then they just kind of live with me. And then eventually I read them, and sometimes I don't. And some folks were reading more because they were saving money. They were using those library cards, or they were accessing reading material they already had at home. And then, of course, when children were sent home for online schooling, families found that they were reading more with their children. So folks were investing more time in reading, but they weren't racking up more reading. They weren't finishing more reading material. The volume of reading did not increase along with the volume of time. Folks were finding it more difficult to get through reading material for the same focus issues that we already discussed. And also many people reported that their reading pace was slower. that they were reading more slowly. You know, we are never going back to the world that we had before the pandemic. And what we have to ask ourselves is, what have we learned about teaching and learning during this time that can inform our work going forward? And while the pandemic may have had a profound effect on the reading motivation for a large number of readers, we always work with readers who may have lost their reading motivation, or we may have lost our own reading motivation. The difference with adults, I've found, is that for many readers, people who identify as readers, when they lose their reading motivation, they know that they're still readers. Our identity as a reader remains, even if we're not reading that much. We can hold a vision of ourselves as a reader into the future. Talking with young people who may be experiencing the first reading slump of their lives in this way, they don't know they can find their way back to it. Talked to a 10-year-old last year around the end of the school year, you know, talking to different classrooms of kids that I get to work with. And a young man said to me, he's a 5th grader, right? He said, "Oh, I used to like reading." Like, he's done reading now. He's 10. He's already decided that part of his life is over. So one of the things we can do with our young people is help them hold a vision of themselves as a reader in the future, that they can find their way back to reading again, that reading is always out there waiting for us, and we can find our way back. So when readers aren't reading very much, then what do? How do we help them find their way back to reading? Or if we're working with young people who have not ever felt a sense of reading interest or motivation? Well, the first thing that we can do, of course, is ensure meaningful access. It doesn't matter how enthusiastic we are about supporting reading and how encouraging we are if there's nothing for young people to read. We can't presume that the access is there. We see differential access between readers in the same school. So you can't presume just because your school has a school library or that you have books in your room that your students have equitable access to reading material. So reading motivation may just be a function of access. We know from large scale studies, Susan Newman and Nancy Solano looked at 21 different studies on book access, and what they were looking for were children's access to print. They looked at the where caregivers could buy books in the community, new and used, what type of environmental print was available for children. Did they have public areas where they could see people reading? What was the public library access? And what was their access, of course, in their homes? And what they found, which should not probably surprise us, is that inequities in children's print access absolutely affected their literacy development. Children who had more access to print in their communities, at school and at home, had higher literacy development than children who did not have that access. So we have to ensure that the physical access is there. And when I say book, I mean paper book, audio book, ebook, whatever way we can get it to a kid. It's a book, right? And that also means the assistive technology that young people might need to read it. So if they need audio support, if they need text to voice support, if they need a way to access that book in a different way, then they have the ability to do so. Beyond, of course, the physical access to print, we want our young people to have social and cultural access. Books have always held the world open, the door open on the world a little bit wider for kids. I know for me, I didn't go on vacations when I was a kid, but I had a library card and I traveled all over the place in the summer with my library card. You're likely familiar with the often quoted metaphor, windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, first coined by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop in 1990. If you've never had the opportunity to read Dr. Sims Bishop's words when she first introduced those terms to us, I've put it up here on the screen for you. But you know, the media that children consume, books included, are one of the primary ways they have to learn about the experiences of people who do not look or live like them. We want our young people to have books that are mirrors that reflect their own experiences. We want them to have books that are windows that give them a glimpse into the lives of people who have different experiences than they do. And we want them to have books that are those sliding glass doors, those pathways that open them up to the world of their imagination and the world of our global family. Once we can consider and reflect on our students' access and do what we can to ensure that they have the access that they need, the other piece, and this is hard for us as educators, who believe in helping young people reach their potential, but we have to accept in our heads that sometimes readers don't read. And we can't let our students languish for weeks without reading. Absolutely not. But any reader can feel a lack of motivation on any given day. And helping our students understand that that sometimes readers don't read is not, it does not mean that it's a failing on their part because they're not feeling motivated to read. We can work with them as their reading mentors to determine exactly why. Sometimes a kid enjoyed the last book they read so much, they're not ready to start another one yet. They're still kind of living in the world of the book they just finished. It's better to dig in with the kid and figure out why that motivation isn't happening than it is to make them feel any sort of shame about it. Now, talking with many readers over the course of the pandemic, these are the most highly used suggestions that I have received on that question of how do you keep your reading life going? How do you keep yourself motivated? People revisit favorites, and we talked about that already. They choose lighter fare, while there is some scorn sometimes for genres like mysteries or true crime or romance or fantasy. We know that many readers of all ages enjoy genre fiction. They enjoy reading things that are not books. They enjoy reading periodicals. They enjoy reading newsletters, websites. Pick something short. Try a series. Listen to audiobooks. Many readers have found that it's the sitting still that is a challenge, and that they can get more reading and listening to audiobooks, connecting with other readers, and then of course planning for future reading. We could have a whole conversation just about that last one. How can we help kids plan for future reading? I certainly talked about that in Reading in the Wild, of course, as well. We sometimes do not appreciate the value of rereading. I have heard well-meaning educators say to children, you can't reread that book, you read it last year. But there are some measurable benefits to rereading a book, and if we reflect on our own reading experiences, we can likely see them. Jody Rodriguez wrote a fantastic blog piece for Parent Magazine for Scholastic, and I've made a bit.ly link for you there. 6 benefits of rereading books. It's an article that you could share with parents who may not understand why that's beneficial to their kids, but it's also certainly a good idea for us to reflect on it too. Choosing that lighter fare, until further notice, let's celebrate everything. I don't know about you, but I have one goal with kids, right? When we're trying to engage them with reading, and it's kind of a nested goal, but can they self-select a book they can read with some comprehension and commit to finishing? Self-select a book, read with some comprehension, and commit to finishing. If they can do that, I don't care what it is. I don't care what it is, right? I can move them. I can move them in all the ways that we want to challenge them to grow as readers. But if we can't get them to self-select a book, read it with some comprehension, and finish it, that's where we're going to stay for a long time. So until further notice, let's celebrate everything. I often hear folks, again, well-meaning, who they complain that kids don't read, and then they disdain the children's choices when they do. And we can't have it both ways. As Maya Angelou said, any book that helps a child form a habit of reading to make reading one of his deep and continuing needs is good for them. Pick something short. We have such a wonderful selection of texts of varied lengths now to share with our students. Some, like novels in verse, are certainly having a heyday. We have more of them being published than ever. Years ago, publishers were not publishing as many short story anthologies and collections for teachers and kids because they didn't think they sold that well. But we now have so many more of those coming out. Nonfiction. Now, a lot of the nonfiction that kids read is short. I would also say there's benefit to them reading longer works of nonfiction as well. And then, of course, graphic novels, which we know have enticed and engaged so many readers. We can look at graphic novels like Chunky, which is a graphic novel memoir. We have to remind ourselves that graphic novel is a format. It is not a genre. And we can find every genre represented in the graphic novels that we have today. Poetry anthologies, not like my fellow Texan, Naomi Shihab Nye, her book Castaway, based on the trash that she picked up on walks here in San Antonio. And then Kent State, a novel in verse by Deborah Wiles, who many of you may know for her historical fiction works. Kent State, written for more middle school and high school students about the murders at Kent State of student protesters. All of these texts are accessible to young people who may be intimidated by longer works, but they're quality pieces of literature, engaging pieces of reading. You might try just reading a few pages of one of these texts with students and then offering it up for independent reading, or encouraging in your book talk rotations more of these shorter texts. We can also look at novels in verse like Samira Surf's, which would make a great read aloud, or short story collections like The Sea-Ringed World or Ancestor Approved. I might use these in this way. Pick one short story, read it out loud to the class, mine it for whatever instructional value you want, use it for whatever you need it for instructionally, but then offer it up to students for independent reading after that. What's great about anthologies like Ancestor Approved is that it represents numerous authors, numerous Native authors who students could discover in a shorter work like this, and that might intrigue them enough to go look up that author and read some of their other longer works too. It's a little taste of an author's work that might catch a reader's interest. There are a lot of short story anthologies, and a couple of years ago, Kelly Jensen, the columnist for Book Riot and also editor of these 3 anthologies for young adults, wrote a guide to young adult short stories in different anthologies. So sometimes teachers want to know, what are the great short stories in some of these new anthologies that I could use for instructional purposes? And Kelly gives you a great snapshot of some books that have been published in the past 10 years or so. Series. And I know, talking to a lot of librarians, they spend a ridiculous amount of their library budgets just trying to keep the series current. Yes. And I know as a parent, I spent a lot of money on Magic Treehouse books. I think I spent a lot of time digging around at garage sales for those books. Certainly had our Hunger Games years at my household. And you may, as a teacher, kind of be weary of having conversations about the same series over and over and over again because they remain evergreen with students. Really, how many conversations can you have about Geronimo Stilton before the thrill is gone? But what we have to recognize is that series are extremely developmentally appropriate for young people and adults as well. I mean, there is a reason why so many authors remain popular. It's with their series, adults like to read them too. There's some tangible benefits to reading those series. We know that when kids walk into a series non-readers, many of them walk out of that series readers. They build comprehension skill as they go. Kids become better at making predictions and inferring as they're reading the same series, because each time they pick up a book, particularly a chronological series, they bring all the background knowledge from book 1 into book 2. They don't start out at comprehension 0. And we know that increasing and accessing their background knowledge improves their comprehension. So kids build comprehension skill when they're reading a series. It also provides them with some comfort, yes, because they have the familiarity of what they're reading. When you're reading multi-volume books by the same author on the same topic, like a science topic, that reinforces vocabulary and grammar structures too. You want to talk about author's craft? Read 5 books by the same author in a series. Kids will start to see it. Even some of the formulaic series like Goosebumps, you can start to see the structure, even some of the word choices that may be used over and over. This is a fun conversation to have with your students. You can talk to them about what series are popular with them, and then what series you have enjoyed, and then celebrate those series in a forward way with kids. What series have you enjoyed over your lifetime? What series are popular with your students now? This would be a great list for a grade level to make. Imagine if you were new to 3rd grade or new to 7th grade and you didn't know that much about the kinds of series that were popular with kids. What a gift a Google Doc or a Padlet that just listed popular series would be. This would be a great thing to collaborate with your librarian to create. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so here are some of the series that I read. I was a Marguerite Henry horse fan. I was that girl in fourth grade that wanted to read everything with animals in it. I wanted to be a veterinarian. I read Nancy Drew, of course. Nancy Drew, quite groundbreaking in her time. She was not the girlfriend or the babysitter or the little damsel that had to be rescued. She was the protagonist. She was the one with the car. It was Ned who was the sidekick. I've always been kind of a contrarian. I realize now, looking back, every other little girl in my class was reading Beezus and Ramona. I went and read Henry Huggins and Ribsy instead. When I got to be a teen, I read Flowers in the Attic. I was only of the generation that read the first three. I was a little shocked to see there were 6 of those books. They're not great, but I talked to many people my age who also read them. And then I read a lot of Harlequin romances when I was in 8th and 9th grade. I don't remember any of those books, except I do remember reading Cotswold Honey, recognizing that I had very white reading experiences as a young person. I really felt like I could just spend the rest of my life reading authors from all sorts of different backgrounds. I still enjoy my series. I'm a big Jasmine Guillory fan. I love her romance series. Tomi Adeyemi's series, Children of Blood and Bone, just a fantastic YA series for kids. We can see authors like Jason Reynolds and his Track series, which has certainly been popular with many of the students I've worked with over the years. And then sports series like Hannah Kahn's great Power Forward series for elementary school kids. So many great series. And also who gets to be the protagonist has changed quite a bit. Our romantic leads have changed. The hero in our fantasy stories have changed. Our protagonists more reflect the children that we have in our world and in our classrooms. Some of the benefits of series that we see across readers, I've already discussed that inferential thinking and comprehension. We see the joy of familiarity. Reading series can often connect readers with each other. I remember a student I had named Rachel, who was a student in my class in 6th grade, and Rachel came into my school in late March. And that's a hard time to join a school because a lot of the social groups have already set, some of the big curricular things have already happened. It's already kind of testing season, and there you are. And, you're, as a teacher, you're hoping that your new students are able to find some kids. I should have given the kids more credit, because by lunchtime, Rachel, who was a Warriors cat book fan, had already found the other Warriors cat book fans in my homeroom. And they had just absorbed her into their little cat clan by lunchtime. And that one series managed to kind of connect the kids enough that they could then get to know each other in other ways. Kids tell me the number one reason they like to read series is because it reduces the stress of finding a book. We found this out from Scholastic's Kids and Family Reading Report. Adults underestimate how hard it is for kids to find books to read. And that casting about looking for a book that may go on too long, our students can keep their reading momentum going. When we work with students and we work to get them into a book, we really work to support them in finding a book that they can read and that they want to read. We get excited about that. But I felt it as a teacher. When that same child gets halfway through that book, I'm starting to wonder, it took him 2 weeks to find that book. How are we going to keep that going? A series cuts down on that. For kids who don't have a reading plan, the series becomes the plan. You don't know what you're reading next. You're reading book 2. You're reading book 22. And we can cut down on that gap between one book and the next, which results often in an increase in reading volume. Kids wind up reading more in a year when they're reading a series because that time between one book and the next is cut down quite a bit. The joy of familiarity, as Terry and I discuss in The Joy of Reading, is one of the 7 joys of reading that were named by a librarian, a public librarian named Mary Plummer in 1910 in an article that she wrote for the Sewanee Review titled The Joys of Reading. And you can see Terry and I's thoughts on that if you get a chance to read the book. But the joy of familiarity is one of those joys that we often start building in childhood. It's that recognition that we feel when we encounter something in a text that we've personally experienced or read elsewhere. For those of us who've been around for a long time, we might even go back to our text to world, text to sell, text to set, text connections. But we also see the joy of familiarity in scripture that we can repeat over and over, songs that we know, memes. The joy of familiarity is one of the reasons that we find memes so funny. Our high school fight song, all of these things, often some of the things that we have nostalgia for are tied to the joy of familiarity in either in some sort of words. And of course, the joy of familiarity is one of the reasons that series are so popular, both series on television and series in books. Listening to audiobooks is something that many readers have told me is a strategy that they have employed to increase their reading motivation and interest, because it gives them more ways to access text. And they also feel that they can do other things, perhaps drive or exercise or walk or even clean while they listen to audiobooks. The Pew Research Foundation does a snapshot of readers across the United States every year. They haven't been able to publish that data for a couple of years. But in 2019, although print books continue to remain the most popular format, audiobooks are on the rise. About 20% of American adults surveyed by Pew in 2019 said they had listened to at least one audiobook over the past 12 months. And I imagine that that has gone up quite a bit over the past couple of years. If I'm trying to, get away from Amazon, I know some of you are too. I'm always looking for ways to support independent bookstores. Here in San Antonio, I'm connected to the Twig, which is my closest independent bookstore. And I'm also trying to use Libro to get audiobooks. You can designate a local bookstore, an independent bookstore, or if you don't have one locally, you might find one you want to support in another community, and you can attach your audiobook purchases to Libro. If you're a secondary teacher, middle school or high school, you might want to check out AudioFile, especially in the summer. I would start looking around April, because AudioFile every year hosts Audiobook Sync, which is an opportunity for teens to get 2 free audiobooks every week over the course of the entire summer. Educators as well. You could just sign up on the site and they'll give you all the information you need. They often group those audiobooks thematically. I remember one year they were matching a more an older text, let's say like Dracula, with a more contemporary Gothic horror young adult novel, and they were doing that pairing around genre or time period. Connecting with other readers is something that also encourages many readers to read. Social readers are a thing, as we do have that stereotype of the bookish loner, of the people who are, like Emily Dickinson in their garret, cut off from other people, socially awkward, sitting in a corner reading books. And we certainly do have readers who are like that. But we also have a great many readers who gain more appreciation for what we read when we have other readers to connect with. I do have students, of course, like this. This is after school holiday party where some of my band students were performing and playing music they were learning for the band concert. Can we all agree that Michael in the foreground is not at the party? That he is reading his book. He's in a different place. And Michael was one of my students. Oh, I enjoyed him so much. Would sit down to confer with him and he would say things like, I think reading books is more important than talking about them, Mrs. Miller. Michael, I get it. I do understand. But we also have those readers who lose their reading interest when they're cut off from other readers to talk to. We know that an entire school community that reads and joyfully models reading encourages even the most vulnerable reader to connect with books. In a reading community where reading is part of the value system, everyone reads more. We know this from Stephen Krashen's work. People read more when they see other people reading. Unfortunately, working with many schools over the years, I've found that one of the primary ways that reading is celebrated, honored, or some school-wide effort is dedicated to it, it's reading competitions and contests. Kids competing to read 1,000,000 minutes, or the principal will kiss a pig if the kids read so many minutes, or you have to reach your AR goal, or kids get pizza coupons or tickets. And what we found is that instead of fostering the message of an inclusive reading community, those school-wide communities and contests and competitions often create a culture of reading winners and reading losers at a school. Contests between readers often advantage children who are English speakers at home, children who have more resources and the ability to access reading material. They own more books at home. They may have caregivers who can take them to the library more often. And I don't think there's any reason why we would want to create reading winners and reading losers at a school. We have to find other ways to value reading besides just forcing kids to compete. As Pernille Ripp, who many of you may know, and I believe she's spoken at the Ed Collab before, we so wisely said we have to create classrooms that do not run on shame, but run on community. I joined a book club with some other educators in 2020, and that absolutely is what saved my reading life. These are just some of the books that we read in 2020. We read young adult and children's books mostly because we're all teacher librarians or teacher librarian adjacent. And we came together every week, we still do, to discuss books. And we also talk about so many other things: politics, parenting, certainly the pandemic, our lives as women in the United States in this time. Lots of media, not just books, but also shows we watched and movies we saw and people we follow on Twitter. And every one of us showed up to a book club meeting having not read the book for that week, but we came anyway. But Terry was in that club too. And the last conversations that we all had with her were at book club. We came together for the community, even more than the books. But of course, the being in the book club helped us maintain a vision of reading in the future. Yes, I must be a reader. I'm in a book club. As Kim Parker found in her doctoral dissertation, students are likely to read more when they can read with their friends during in-class reading time. There's merit to holding book clubs with students. We know that young readers benefit from discussions with other readers. It increases students' comprehension and their engagement with reading. Their appreciation for what they read also increases. And they see themselves as part of a community of readers when they have other readers to talk to. I'll close with these two book recommendations. If you're looking for book recommendations around book clubs, when I was a new teacher, we called them lit circles and we had roles. And I just really always felt like that was the shaky shopping cart wheel on my teacher cart, right? I always felt like I was either over controlling the book clubs or it was just too loosey-goosey and it just didn't hold together. I wished I'd had these two books when I was a new teacher. Dr. Sonia Cherry Paul, who you'll be listening to this afternoon, I am so glad I went before her. Dr. Sonia Cherry Paul and her collaborator, Dr. Dana Johansson, have written Breathing New Life into Book Clubs. It has so many foundational practical ways of looking at book clubs that are highly engaging to students. And then, of course, Kelly Gallagher and Penny Kittle have collaborated on a new book now, but their first collaboration, 180 Days, which was written before the pandemic, looked at how they did virtual book clubs across the United States between their high school classes. And if you're interested in doing some sort of virtual book club, or even looking at their ideas for book clubs with secondary students, I encourage you to check it out. I know that we're coming to the end of our time. You have so many other people that you get to learn from today. I appreciate your time and attention this morning. Best wishes to all of you. I hope you enjoyed the day. Chris, thank you so much for inviting me to talk with everyone.
Please, thank you for giving your time this morning and kicking off our gathering in such an important, inspiring way. I'm reading tweets and watching you, and I have 1,000 things that I need to work on now. So thank you for all of your support as always. And I found the book, The Joy of Reading, my copy here. If you have been as inspired as I am, I don't even know why I have to ask you. Of course you were. Here, let me resize this. Here is once again Donalyn's website. thebookwhisperer.com. You can reach out to her directly there. You also can find her on Twitter at Donalyn Books. And I know you already have these books on your shelves, but if you don't, there they are as well too. And again, if you feel inspired during this keynote or anytime today please do take what you may have paid for registration or for coffee or for grabbing a quick lunch, and instead of paying for those things, please pay the joy forward. We suggest the two charities that we've adopted for today. Donalyn has adopted for us Racist, and Dr. Sonia Cherry-Paul has adopted the Abolitionist Teaching Network. You can rewatch Donalyn's keynote after we're done here. It will be archived on this site for you to see anytime until our next gathering in April. And then please do come back for our closing keynote with Dr. Sonia Cherry-Paul. She'll be presenting live this afternoon. But before that, we have many amazing workshops all in between. So coming up in session 1, you'll just have to click over on the website or follow us on Twitter to find the links. Our colleagues at the EdCollab, Julia and Joellen, will be leading New Titles That Connect Communities K through 12. They are both our book ambassadors here at the Educator Collaborative. And so it's a whole book talk session where you'll want to have your carts or library card handy so that you can get a lot of new titles for yourselves. And then Vinay will be leading a session, The Abolitionist Journey, Walking the Underground Railroad of Educational Justice. I mentioned her earlier. I've been learning with her in our think tank this year, and this is going to be an amazing session, so please tune in there. And for Donalyn, for everyone who presents today, because we're not in person, normally you could go get in a very long line, usually with Donalyn at the front, to thank her after her keynote, to ask her to sign things, to say hello, or catch her in a hallway with a cup of coffee. Because we're all virtual, please do share all of your feedback, your joy, quotes that you loved, anything at all. Please share that with our presenters all day long. It takes a lot to prepare for a day like today and then to give time like all of them are. Every time you reach out, it's a virtual, what would have been a hallway hug, at least virtually. So please do that. If you tag us, hashtag the EdCollab gathering, we'll be sure to send that out to the world as well. So thank you, Donalyn. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this day. Please have a great rest of your gathering. And if you miss any sessions, you can always come back and watch them while they're archived. Take care, everyone.